The night shift. When most people are safely tucked in their beds, there's a different world that comes alive in the darkness. A world where security guards stand as the only barrier between the abandoned buildings and whatever might be lurking in the shadows. These are 4 true stories from night security guards who experienced things that no amount of training could have prepared them for. Things that made them question everything they thought they knew about the places they were paid to protect. Story 1. The Warehouse Walker. My name is Marcus, and I worked night security at a furniture warehouse in Detroit for 3 years. 3 long years of walking empty corridors, checking locks, and trying to stay awake during the dead hours between 2 and 4 a.m. I thought I'd seen everything until my last week on the job. It was a Tuesday night in October, and the weather had just started to turn cold. You know that kind of cold that seeps through your jacket and makes your bones ache? That was the kind of night it was. I'd been making my rounds every hour on the hour, same as always. The warehouse was massive, about 200,000 square feet of storage space filled with furniture, from bedroom sets to office chairs, all stacked up to the ceiling in neat rows. Around 1:30 a.m., I was sitting in the security office, a tiny room with monitors showing feeds from 12 different cameras scattered throughout the building. Most of the cameras covered the main aisles and the loading docks, but there were a few blind spots, old sections where the Section C housed bedroom furniture, beds, dressers, nightstands, all arranged in mock room setups. During the day, it looked like a normal furniture showroom, but at night, with just my flashlight cutting through the darkness, it looked like a maze of sleeping spaces. On my last night, I decided I had to know what was happening. I couldn't leave without answers. So when the footsteps started, this time in Section B with the dining room sets, I grabbed not just my flashlight, but also my phone to record whatever I might find. I followed the sounds to a dining room display with a large oak table surrounded by 6 chairs. As I quit the next morning, told my supervisor I was moving out of state for family reasons. I never went back to that warehouse, and I never worked security again. Sometimes I wonder if I was losing my mind, if the isolation and stress of night work finally got to me. But then I remember how real it all felt, how clearly I could hear those footsteps and that furniture moving. Maybe some places hold onto memories of the people who once lived with that furniture. Maybe when you take someone's bed, their favorite chair, their dining room table, and put it all in a dark warehouse, some part of them follows. All I know is that somewhere in Detroit, there's a furniture warehouse where the night shift guard is never truly alone.
Story 2. The Office That Never Sleeps. I'm Sarah, and I used to work security at a 15-story office building in downtown Phoenix. It was one of those glass and steel towers that looks impressive during the day, but turns into something completely different at night. During my 2 years there, I learned that some buildings never really sleep, no matter how empty they appear. The building housed various companies, accounting firms, law offices, a few tech startups, and a marketing agency that took up the entire 14th floor. My job was simple: patrol each floor twice per shift, monitor the security cameras, and make sure no one was in the building who shouldn't be there after 8 p.m. But the 14th floor was different. Even during my first week, I noticed it. The marketing agency up there, Pinnacle Creative, always felt occupied. Not in an obvious way, but in subtle ways that took me weeks to identify. Lights that I was sure I'd checked were off would be on when I passed by again. Computer screens that should have been in sleep mode would be glowing softly in otherwise dark offices. And there was always this low hum of activity, like the sound you hear. The first really strange incident happened about a month into the job. It was a Thursday night, around 2:30 a.m., and I was doing my second patrol of the evening. When I got to the 14th floor, I could hear what sounded like a meeting happening in one of the conference rooms. Multiple voices, muffled by the closed door, but definitely the rhythm of people talking, occasionally laughing, the sound of papers shuffling. I checked my log. The building should have been empty except for me. I knocked on the conference room door and called out, "Security! I need to see some identification from anyone in there." The talking stopped immediately. Complete silence. I tried the door handle, but it was locked. I used my master key to unlock it and pushed the door open, flashlight ready. The room was empty. Completely empty. But the conference table had paper. One night, I decided to try something different. Instead of making my usual rounds, I positioned myself in the stairwell where I could watch the 14th floor entrance through the glass door. I wanted to see if people were somehow getting past me, entering the building through a way I didn't know about. I sat there for 2 hours, from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., and I never saw a single person enter or leave that floor. But I could hear them working. Muffled conversations, the ding of elevator doors opening and closing, even what sounded like the coffee maker running in their break room. Around 3:15 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway, coming toward the door where I was watching. I could see a shadow moving under the door, like someone was walking down the hall. The footsteps stopped right in front of the door, and I held my breath, waiting to see who would appear. Nobody did. The shadow stayed there for about 30 seconds, then slowly moved away. But I never saw a person, just the shadow and the sound of footsteps. That's when I started wondering if I was dealing with something that wasn't entirely current. I did some research on the building's history and found on my last night working there, I decided to break my own rule. During my 2 a.m. patrol, when the 14th floor was at its most active, I walked right into the middle of the cubicle area and spoke to the empty air. "I don't know if you can hear me," I said, feeling ridiculous but determined to try. "But I want you to know that I've been watching over this place for 2 years, and I've never tried to interfere with your work. I hope you got your project finished." The typing sounds stopped. The whole floor went completely quiet for about 10 seconds. Then I heard something that still gives me chills when I think about it. A single voice, clearer than any I'd heard before, said, "Thank you." I finished my shift without any other incidents, and the next morning I started a new job at a small retail security company. I heard from Miguel that they hired someone new for the night shift at the office building, a young guy fresh out of security training.
Story 3. The School That Echoes. My name is David, and I spent 4 years working night security at Lincoln Elementary School in a small town in Ohio. It was built in 1952, one of those solid brick buildings that was meant to last forever. During the day, it was filled with the normal sounds you'd expect: kids laughing, teachers instructing, the general chaos of elementary school life. But at night, when I was the only person in those empty hallways, I learned that some sounds never really leave a place where children spend their days. I started working there in September, right at the beginning of the school year. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, gave me a tour on my first day and explained my duties. Walk the perimeter of the building every 2 hours, check that all doors and windows were secure, make sure the heating system was functioning properly, and keep an eye on the playground equipment to make sure no vandals were causing damage. The school had that familiar elementary school smell, a mixture of crayons, construction paper, cafeteria food, and that industrial floor cleaner they use everywhere. During my first few weeks, I actually enjoyed the job. It was peaceful, walking through the quiet hallways, seeing all the cheerful decorations the teachers had put up, the children's artwork hanging on bulletin boards. But as the weather got colder and the nights got longer, I started noticing things that didn't quite fit with an empty building. It began with sounds from the cafeteria. Around 11 p.m., I'd hear what sounded like chairs scraping across the floor, the clatter of lunch trays, and the general noise of kids eating together. The first time it happened, I rushed to the cafeteria thinking someone had broken in, but when I got there, everything was silent and still. The tables were folded up against the walls like they always were after the custodial staff finished cleaning, and there was no sign that anyone had been there. I told myself it was probably the heating system caught. One night in November, I was doing my midnight patrol when I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. A child crying. Not the dramatic crying of a hurt or angry kid, but the quiet, heartbroken sobbing of a child who was truly sad about something. The sound was coming from one of the third-grade classrooms. I followed it down the hallway, my flashlight creating long shadows between the lockers. The crying got clearer as I got closer, and I could tell it was a little girl, probably 7 or 8 years old. I tried the classroom door, but it was locked like all the others. I used my master key and opened it slowly, calling out, "Hello? Is someone in here? It's okay, I'm here to help." The crying stopped immediately, but I could feel presence. Like someone was in that room with me, even though I couldn't see anyone. I swept my flashlight. The next time I heard crying from room 108, I didn't use my flashlight. I just stood outside the door and spoke softly to the empty hallway. "Emily, is that you, sweetheart? I know you're sad, and I know you miss your mommy. But you're safe here at school, okay? All your teachers loved you very much, and your friends remember you." The crying stopped, and for a moment, the whole building was perfectly silent. Then I heard something that almost made me cry myself, a small voice, barely a whisper, saying, "Thank you." After that night, I developed a routine. During my midnight rounds, I'd always stop by room 108. If I heard crying, I'd talk to Emily, telling her about my day, about the things I'd noticed in her classroom. New artwork from the current students, books that had been added to the reading corner, seasonal decorations the teacher had put up. One night in May, near the end of the school year, something different happened. I was doing my 1 a.m. patrol when I heard laughter from the playground. Not the sad crying I'd grown used to, but genuine, happy laughter. I looked out the window and couldn't see anything, but the laughter continued for about 10 minutes. The sound of a child having the time of her life on the swings and slides. After that night, the sounds gradually decreased. By the time I left that job 4 years later, I'd only hear Emily occasionally, and when I did, it was usually laughter from the playground or the sound of small footsteps skipping down the hallway. Never crying anymore. I like to think that somehow, over those 4 years, Emily got to have the school experience she'd missed. Maybe she finally felt welcomed and safe enough to just be a kid again, to play and laugh instead of crying for her mom. Maybe she realized that Lincoln Elementary would always be a place where she belonged, where people cared about her, even if they couldn't see her. I still drive past that school sometimes when I'm in town visiting family. During the day, it looks exactly the same as it did when I worked there. Kids playing on the playground. Story 4. The Factory Floor. I'm James, and for 6 months, I worked the night security shift at an abandoned textile factory on the outskirts of Cleveland. The factory had been closed for over a decade, but the property management company still needed someone to watch over the building while they figured out what to do with it. It was supposed to be an easy job. Just make sure no one broke in, no vandals caused damage, and no squatters set up camp in the empty building. What they didn't tell me was that some places never really stopped working, even when the last shift ended years ago. The factory was massive. A 3-story brick building that had once employed over 500 people making textiles and clothing. Walking through it during the day, you could still see the outlines on the floor where huge machines had been bolted down, the overhead tracks where fabric would move from station to station, and the time clock where workers had punched in and out for decades. But at night, under the dim light of a few security bulbs, the place felt completely different. It felt like it was waiting for something, like all that empty space was holding its breath. My first week was quiet. I'd walk the perimeter of the building every few hours, check the loading docks, make sure all the windows and doors were secure. The building was solid, well built, and even though it had been empty for so long, it was in good condition. During the day, I could see why someone might want to buy it and convert it into lofts or office space. But during my second week, I started hearing the sounds. It began around 10 p.m. every night, a low humming noise that seemed to come from the main factory floor. At first, I thought it might be some kind of electrical issue, maybe old wiring that was still connected to the power grid. But when I investigated, I found that most of the electrical systems had been disconnected when the factory closed. The humming wasn't coming from any machinery that was actually there. One night, I decided to try a different approach. Instead of trying to investigate or record the sounds, I just sat down in the middle of the factory floor and listened. I wanted to see if I could make out any details about what kind of work was being done, if the sounds followed any kind of schedule or routine. What I heard was fascinating and heartbreaking at the same time. The phantom workers seemed to be following a normal factory schedule. I could hear what sounded like a shift supervisor giving instructions at the beginning of the night. Throughout the hours, there would be the steady sounds of production work, punctuated by what seemed like break times when the machinery sounds would stop and the conversation would increase. Around 6 a.m., I'd hear sounds that seemed like cleanup, equipment being shut down, floors being swept, that end-of-shift routine that happens in every workplace. By 7 a.m., the factory would be silent again. I started researching the history of the factory and found old newspaper articles about its closing. It hadn't been a gradual shutdown. The company had announced on a Friday that the following Monday would be the last day of operation. Workers showed up that final Monday not knowing it would be their last shift, and many of them had been there for decades. Some had started working at the factory right out of high school and expected to retire from there. The more I learned about the people who had worked there, The more convinced I became that some part of them was still showing up every night, still trying to do the jobs they'd loved and depended on. I found an old employee directory and started looking up names, trying to find people who had worked the night shift. Most of them had moved away or found work elsewhere, but I managed to track down a woman named Ruth who had worked the factory for 32 years, right up until it closed. When I called her and explained what I was experiencing, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That job was my whole life. I worked nights there for 3 decades, and some of the best people I ever knew were on that shift. We weren't just co-workers, we were family. When they closed the factory, it felt like they were closing down a whole community." She described the night shift routine in detail, and it matched exactly what I was hearing. The 10 p.m. start time, the break schedule, even the cleanup routine at the end of the shift. Ruth told me about specific workers who had been characters on the night shift: a man named Frank who was always telling jokes during breaks, a woman named Maria who would sing quietly while she worked, a supervisor named Bill who had a particular way of calling out instructions that could be heard over all the machinery. "If you're hearing what I think you're hearing," Ruth said, "then maybe some of us never really left." That place was home to a lot of people. During my last month at the factory, I started saying hello when the phantom shift would begin each night. I'd walk out onto the factory floor around 10 p.m. and call out, "Evening, folks. Hope everyone has a good shift tonight." The sounds would continue normally, and sometimes I'd swear I could hear responses, "Good evening," called back from somewhere across the floor, or the sound of people acknowledging a new person joining the workplace. I never felt scared or threatened by what was happening. If anything, it felt like I was being welcomed into a community, like that. On my last night at the factory, I did something I'd never done before. When the shift sound started at 10 p.m., I walked to the middle of the factory floor and spoke directly to the empty air. I wanted to let everyone know that tonight is my last night here. I've really enjoyed working alongside all of you these past 6 months. This place was lucky to have such dedicated people, and I hope wherever you all are now, you know that your work mattered and that you're remembered. The factory sound stopped, and for about 30 seconds, there was complete silence. Then I heard something that I'll never forget, what sounded like dozens of people clapping. A round of applause that